everyone. Welcome to the next episode in this series where we're covering the ERP Center of Excellence. And just a reminder, this is a joint program between Dynamics Communities, Community Summit North America, Acceleration Economy, and HandsFree ERP. And glad to be joined by these wonderful folks here: Wayne Sadin, CIO of PriceSmart; Kenny Mulliken, CIO of Peregrine Films; Peter Jekyll with HandsFree ERP. And we'll be diving into another important topic that centers around your ERP modernization strategy, your journey, your roadmap. And something I want to point out is a lot of what we'll be talking about will be live and in person at Community Summit North America 2023, where all of us will be there in attendance. And we'll have a lounge available where you can stop by, chat, ask questions, get a better understanding of what you need to figure out with your ERP modernization. And part of that, and one of these really important things, is to understand the tools that really matter. What tools you need to have in place, what tools can help you through this modernization strategy and get you onto the road to success with that. If we can say there is success there, but everybody's definition of success could be a little bit different, but I'm glad to be joined by each of you. So hey, just to kick things off here, Wayne, I was wondering if we could dive into something here. We've discussed about, managing budgets, data migration readiness, automation, and more throughout this series here. And I'm sure there are tools you count on, during your modernization project, or even tools that you're still looking to discover. But hey, can you walk through a few of those tools that you found very valuable and highlight kind of some of the capabilities there, maybe?
Sure. Considering that a project like an ERP modernization is less about technology and more about organizational change and about process and about people, the tools that I start with are the tools that help me think about my process and my people and my organization. So, as silly as it may sound, it's how do people write? Buy them a tool to help them write better. There are several. And by the way, probably we'll use a large language model, and we'll tell it to write the requirements for us. See what happens there. So it's process mining tools. Is how do you get under what you're doing now and create documentation, and then hopefully fix the process? Because as we've said, I think a number of times in this series, don't automate the bad stuff. Figure out what you want to be, and then move the process in the right direction, and then add the automation to that. It's organization, collaboration, and communication tools. However many IT people you're going to put on this project, however many partner people you're going to put in this project, you're going to have 5 times as many end user people, business people, 10 times as many, depending on the size of your company. How do you get them all informed? How do you have a conversation with them? How do you whiteboard with them when they work all around the world? So put that under the category of organization, collaboration, communication. As you move a little further along, you need project management and budgeting tools. And there are products that combine both, but they're also separate products. You'll probably find your organization has both of them. And why reinvent the wheel unless that's one of the things you're modernizing? So plug into your organization. I'll tell you what, if you're presenting a budget and your format is different than the one they use to approve a new factory or a new cruise ship or whatever, the board's going to shake their head, roll their eyes, and send you away. So be sure you're able to communicate and collaborate. And the last tool is a marker for your whiteboard. You are going to draw a lot of pictures when you do any of these projects, because you're going to have your beautiful slides and whatever tool you use, and somebody's going to go, well, wait a minute, what about that? And so either it's a fancy whiteboard software and you get your little stylus, or you just stand up to the whiteboard behind you and draw a big picture. So for those that think it's about geeky tools, let me change your mind. It's about the tools that help make us more effective as an organization. And so that's my focus.
Yeah, and I was wondering underneath that, Wayne, if you could highlight or suggest maybe ways that folks could prioritize those tools to help them really start optimizing the process, because that's critical. And one thing I was even thinking of too is if they do go the more modern route with the geeky tools, how do they talk to one another? Because a lot of times you have people, like you said, scattered all over the world, scattered across different departments. And how do you get that communication, collaboration that went on in one meeting over to another team to make sure that everybody's talking the same language, if you will? So I didn't know if you had any thoughts around that.
I think the prioritization you think about this as a journey. You start
Mhm.
with an idea. The business comes to you and says, we have a problem. Or the board says, we read about this in a magazine. Or you just know that it's time to take your 40-year-old software and do something with it. So the beginning of the journey is, what am I going to do? And that's your conceptual tools. It could be your process mining and so on. 90% of the way through the project, when you're testing, you hopefully are at process mining. So those tools fall by the wayside, but their output is a guide to you. Project management tools are very strong at the beginning, and then they become project monitoring tools, time tracking tools, budget tracking tools as you go to the end. So when I prioritize them by where I am on my roadmap. But to your point, Aaron, the key to this is we start with the people, we continue with the people, and we end with the people. I tell my
Mhm.
teams, the project isn't done when the software is written. The project isn't even done when you go through testing. The project is done when the business is successfully using the tools to change what they do, to make money, to save money, to improve the employee experience and the customer experience. So if you think about what you're trying to deliver is change with software underneath it, focus on how you get people on board. Marketing tools, brochures, websites that you build explaining the features, language translation tools. If I operate in 5 languages, how do I keep my material up to date in every language?
Mhm.
So the tools are endless. And again, if you work for a multinational organization, you probably have a lot of those tools anyway. I hope you're able to communicate across your footprint. If not, make that part of your modernization effort, put it in the budget,
Mhm.
collaborate with human resources, collaborate with marketing, and certainly collaborate with your C-suite because you got to be working together on this. And so, as you said, it's about the people, collaboration, and communication.
Yeah, Wayne, and over to you, Peter. I was going to build on top of what Wayne was just outlining here, and based on some recent projects you've shared, a few tools that have added a lot of value, and you know, who are they, or what do they do, and then maybe unpack that a bit for us.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little bit different direction, focusing specifically on the dynamics market space
Hmm.
and more tactical, very specific tactical tools. Even though I like the marker because there are many people in my organization that don't think I can function without a whiteboard. So I like that. I like that suggestion. So two things that I want to talk about that have been really instrumental recently, and two tools that I want to talk about, and the two rules that I use to pick them out. Number one is in their specific areas of a project, they make a significant impact. So it's not incremental, it's significant. Where historically people have found like 30 to 60% cost savings on the tools. And then ubiquitous from a standpoint of, are these tools that almost any project that you're going to engage in the ERP world could use? So anything that is considered to be an upgrade or a new implementation, these tools will work in both of these environments. So number one is every project in the ERP world that I've seen starts with that requirements gathering. And generally requirements gathering is very old school, pen and paper, sit down, interview people, take forever. There is a new tool on the market that we're deploying. And what it does is it moves the gathering of data into the cloud, just like you're trying to move your ERP system into the cloud. Why not gather your data more efficiently and quickly in the cloud? And what this tool does is it streamlines and modernizes that ability to quickly and efficiently gather requirements. But then it also has a ton of built-in logic behind the scenes that analyzes your requirements against the Dynamics ERP stack. And what that does immediately is it reduces the opinions and replaces it with data. So instead of having, the back and forth from different version of ERP providers, you get very specific facts. And then the other important thing about the tool is that most RFPs, when they're developed, they're a point solution, because what you've done is you've created a bunch of spreadsheets and some Word documents, that once those requirements are gathered, that's it. End of story. The intelligence built into this tool creates requirements as far as people and hours for different solutions, as well as a project plan. So what this does is it literally spans the entire scope of a project and has been found to cut about 60% of the time and the cost out of the requirements gathering process. And then on an entire enterprise implementation, as much as 30% of time and cost. So absolutely tremendous value, because everybody really starts with that RFP process and then can carry the functionality from this tool throughout the entire project. The other tool that I want to talk about is a platform that deals with two things that are often very hidden in the proposal, in the project proposal process, and that is data migration, data cleaning, data migration, and the integrations building. And what I mean by hidden is that these project plans and proposals can become very, very competitive. And when you want to be that low-cost bidder on a project, oftentimes there's a conversation with a prospect that goes something like this. You have internal resources. You guys can migrate the data, right? And that great IT team you have, they can write those integrations. We can take that off the table and forget about that. And then somewhere halfway through the project, everybody figures out that the client doesn't have the time, doesn't have the expertise, doesn't have the desire to work on data migration or integrations. And then all of a sudden, these become billable events back on the plate for the consulting team and change orders. The other issue with data migration and integrations is it is typically done by different consultants in different ways using different spreadsheets and different tools. And so the solution that we have is a data platform that has been around for over 18 years. It's native and it's inside of the FSCM program, and it uses no programming. It's all, it's all non-programmer built. And so what you can do is you can create integrations between your existing data and the FSCM tool and the cleaning between the two. It provides data governance, and it creates the integrations between different tools, all again without requiring developers. And so what that does is it creates the ability for non-developers to create a very similar set of rules and integrations where you don't have different integrations and different migration tactics done in different ways. So it's all very, compact and similar for everybody. And so the monetary and time savings with that tool, again, it's been around for 18 years, is found to be about 60%. So to me, two things, all projects start with an RFP. Almost all projects have data and integrations. Two great tools with big savings.
Well, speaking of savings and some of the costs savings that you talked about, there's also some of that incremental costs that are sometimes associated with certain tools, and also the types of people or teams that should be evaluating some of these tools. What are your thoughts about that, as far as what are the incremental costs and who should be the ones that really are evaluating and using these tools?
Yeah, it's interesting because none of these tools are cheap. They're only cheap in retrospect to a project. And the interesting thing is, it's almost like you can't sell these things until it's too late. And so the ability to be able to very specifically lay out the value proposition of these with other projects that have done this becomes critical, because these are tools that are in the $50,000 to $100,000 range that can be a drop in the bucket on as far as an entire project is concerned. And the numbers look really big up front until they don't when you've spent that many times over in these areas. So it's it sounds like a sales pitch up front, but it's one of these, it's really required to be, highly educational as far as how this changes, how this changes the dynamic of an implementation.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like you had highlighted earlier, you don't want to run into the billable time late in a project, and if you can figure some of those things out up front or earlier on, then that just saves those huge costs down the road, that or those surprise costs, I'll call it, down the road, that I think we can all see had experience with, and plenty of times surprise costs coming in. But it speaking of these tools and how do we prioritize them and so forth, Kenny, I was wondering, a lot of these tools seem very convincing, compelling in some way, I guess, depending on your project needs and so forth. But can you share some of your thoughts on some of the best tools to prioritize based on your recent experience here with Dynamics 365 F&O project that you had to go through?
Sure. So, going last, it's a lot harder to find anything to add to what these guys have said. But what I want to start with is agreeing completely with a couple of things. So one is collaboration tools are so important. When you have a project of this magnitude, you really don't want to leave it up to just emails going back and forth to remember what was agreed on or what's needed by somebody. So for us, our DevOps tool was so valuable to be able to have something that both integrated all the parts of the project that were being done with communication, where in the middle of one of the requirements gathering pieces, you could tag somebody and that automatically sends them an email that lets them know, hey, you were included in this conversation. You need to go in and answer this question or sign off on this test case, or just a lot of different things like that. And so that collaboration, we found at first we were resistant because the business users weren't used to using those kind of tools, and we were a little bit worried about inflicting them on them. But it ended up actually being super important to do that. And then the next is just sort of going back to one of the things that Peter said. When you're evaluating a tool, and especially if you're in a smaller company, like my company is not a multi-billion-dollar company that thinks in terms of millions. We often think in terms of thousands. And so if somebody says, hey, this tool is $50,000 or $100,000, that's something that requires board approval. I mean, this is not an easy thing to get done. But when you are in an ERP implementation and you find that you've got an overrun on something, $100,000 can tick off just like that. Just this little extra thing you hadn't thought of. It just doesn't take very many meetings at consultants' billable hour rate to add up to many thousands of dollars per week. And so if you can spend the money ahead of time, even though, like Peter said, it's hard to think that way, the two tools that I would say are exactly making sure that you've got your requirements right so that you have a better idea of what the overall time frame and estimate is going to be. Because the exact same thing that Peter talked about, I've seen personally. It happens every time. Oh, yeah, we should be able to handle that, thinking that sounds like a pretty small job. And once you're in the middle of it all and you realize the magnitude of it and you say, sorry, we don't have the people to do that. We just don't have the resources. And then the partner says, well, okay, I'll see if I can find somebody for that, but here's what it's going to cost. And all of a sudden that tool seems pretty cheap compared to the overruns on your project. But for another tool, just zipping on ahead past the implementation, one of the things that we found was kind of one of the most unexpected things to many users is they're used to getting data out of the system in a particular way. And if you've had an on-prem ERP, you probably were able to hit the database directly, or at least through some kind of exposed views or queries, or there's a lot of different ways that you could fairly easily pull information. Say, for instance, the finance and accounting team could pull spreadsheets to get what they needed. Well, all of a sudden, you've got this system that's in the cloud, and the database is pretty much a locked black box. You don't get direct access to it. So you've got to think about what tools are we going to use to provide that same level of access to people. And one of the really common ones is the BI and analytics tools. So for us, that's Power BI. and it's really, really valuable and important. But then even going a little bit lower level than that, because that's not so much for the transactional level, you need a tool that can get the transactional data out of the system and into a format that they can use. So for us, there's a tool called Atlas that we use, but there's probably other tools similar that know how to talk the language of the cloud ERP and pull the data into it. And in many cases, what they also do is they'll cache that data. They'll store it so it doesn't have to go get it through the web interface every time you need it, but it'll go and pull it down and store it. And now they can do their reports. They can use other means of pulling long lists of general ledger transactions if that's what they need for their business process. And in the case of this tool, it also allows you to push information back up to the system. So that same tool allows those financial analysts to go in, pull down a information, create general ledger transactions, and then push them and post them up back into 365. So, that's just another type of tool that I think is really important that sometimes people don't think about. If they were just using Excel and hitting the database directly, they're going to need a tool that makes it easy for those business users to get the data out and put data back in.
Yeah, I like that, because it's really important to have that easy access, but secure access to that data, but also in the right hands, of the data. Meaning the data goes into the right hands of the right people, so they can evaluate and do what they need to do. As we're kind of closing things down here in our discussion today, I was wondering if each of you kind of quickly give your top 2-3 tips here for evaluating some of these tools that we've talked about. How do people should be thinking about it? Talked about maybe the types of people that should be using certain tools, but what are some of the top 2 or 3 tips that you would recommend here? So Wayne, if you could kick us off.
Sure. I'll give you 2 tips, and one of them has been a consistent theme through all of these episodes. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate within your team, communicate across your entire enterprise, and communicate with your ecosystem, the partners and the tool vendors and everybody. Everybody's got to know where you are. They got to know what the risks are. They got to know where the project stands, and they got to know what their next action should be. So whether it's tools or people or an approach, don't think you can under-communicate and they'll all figure it out, because they won't. That's definitely the number one thing. The other one, to a point Kenny's made, and we've all made a couple of times, when you're doing your project budget, put a budget line item for every kind of thing you might need to do. If it's data migration, if it's tools, if it's communication, if it's backfilling business resources, maybe you don't put any dollars in it right now, but you don't forget things and you get to think through them. So we put money, when I've done budgets for this, for training explicitly, for data migration. Now we might say, who's going to do it? It's going to cost $1 million, or in Kenny's case, maybe cost a little less. It depends on the size of your organization. But you take that number and you say it costs this much to do it. Now, who do you want to do it? Is it the partner? Is it a third party? Is it your own team? But at least you know how much it's going to cost in hours if you don't want to do dollars. And make a list and be sure you've shared this with your CFO, your CEO, your board, so they understand all the kinds of expenses you might incur. Then you can say, do I have the resources to do it internally? And again, a recurrent theme is a project management office, a PMO, is really important, because that will help you say, in 3 months, when I need to migrate data, I can't, because I'll be doing this other project over here. So I better budget for the partner. And by the way, if you talk to the partner at the beginning and put it into the initial deal, you'll probably get a better rate than if they do COPC. That stands for Change Orders as a Profit Center. And it's an actual strategy in consulting companies. So they're all trying to maximize the profit of their change orders. If they make margin of X on the deal, they make margin of 3X on the change orders. That's kind of a rule of thumb in the business. So bear in mind that's what you're dealing with, and be sure you have a list of all your, what we'll call known unknowns, so you can have your eyes open as you go through the project.
Yeah, I love that, Wayne. And Peter, over to you.
One thing about what Kenny said that is really genius is DevOps is free because it comes with the software. And so it is a phenomenal tool as long as you use it right, but it is free. And so it's one of those few things that people don't take advantage of. As far as the tools are concerned, this is going to be an interesting approach. I said on an earlier conversation that I don't care about what your budget is. And that shocks people because the approach that I take on projects, I say, look, here are the tasks that have to be done. And those tasks have to be done regardless of whether I do them, somebody else does them, you do them, another partner. It doesn't matter. Here are the tasks. And here are the best estimates of the number of hours it takes to accomplish those tasks. If there was somebody that had the magic bullet that could cut those tasks in half, they would win all the deals. So you start off with hours to accomplish specific tasks, and then you look at those and say, okay, what can you accomplish internally realistically? What can we help you with realistically? And are there any tasks in here that could be done faster, better, cheaper with the tool set? So so taking that approach is, for me, we try to apply process, people, and tools to take that task list in conjunction with a prospect customer and say, okay, here's everything that needs to be done. What can we apply as a team where, including tools, to reduce the number of hours and the cost of the project? A little different approach. It does shock people when I tell them I don't care about their budget because it's just a make happy number.
Well, hey, you gotta sometimes throw a curveball out there, Peter, to get people's attention too. But that's sometimes the reality, because you have to do those tasks, like you said, in order to accomplish, putting something in place like an ERP or modernizing that ERP. So, Kenny, what are your closing thoughts here?
I'm going to reiterate a theme that I've kind of carried through all of these sessions, and that is the most valuable thing that you can do before you ever begin your ERP project is to hire a consultant or a consulting team, which is not the provider, not the implementation partner, but somebody who's a third party who's going to help guide you through the process of budgeting, of selecting those tools, of convincing whoever you need to convince of the need for spending on certain areas, and can basically just guide the whole process. They may even provide internal project management. I've talked to a few different people who've taken this approach, and it has made an incredibly large difference. And so I don't see why it wouldn't also help for selecting your tools. They may know of the tools that would be the most helpful for you. They can also help you decide, again, how much that you would need to spend on them and the priority. Unless you are in a company that has implemented ERP dozens of times, or you personally have, then you need somebody to come in and help you do it. I'm not one of those people. Guys like Wayne and Peter have been through a lot more of these. And so I need to have people that have that kind of expertise coming in and joining with me on a process like this. So that's the biggest advice that I can give on this topic, and almost any other that we'll talk about in the cloud ERP modernization.
Well, Kenny, I think you've wrapped it up nicely about what people should be thinking about in that, and as far as putting in the right teams in place, like you said, these external project teams that could help you, guide you through this, that outside of the implementation teams, and really see the success out of putting something like this in place, and the right tools. So, well, fellas, thank you so much for joining us on this conversation around the ERP modernization and things to think about as part of your ERP Center of Excellence. And we'll chat again soon.
Thank you.